Welcome back to another episode of the Cardboard Herald podcast. I am your host today, Jack, and I am joined by regular host Eric, my terrestrial friend here.
Hello,
exhausted from a run.
I am of Earth. Terrestrial.
Of Earth.
I did run. I showed that Earth who's boss. I gave it a good foot pounding.
1-2.
Kicked it.
Yeah. Hey, it's a good week to get out some aggression on hopefully inanimate objects in healthy means, like taking a run. So if you have been under a rock, then you might not know that in the U.S., as of April 1st, new tariffs were announced by our federal government. This was a big ticket item for President Trump. And while I'm going to keep this relatively apolitical as far as the side-by-side commentary, though Eric and I both have our politics and we have opinions, and I'm not afraid of sharing those opinions, I thought that it would be a good opportunity for us to kind of have a more focused podcast just on the subject of tariffs and discussing what these things are, why this is important for Americans in general, but worldwide, why it's important for the board game hobby, how we got here, and kind of like what some of the speculation is for the fallout of this and what people should kind of stay tuned for, pay attention to, and what sorts of actions they might be able to take or be able to, support the creatives in the hobby. And even still, we initially were thinking about doing just a crowdfunding episode, and you just brought up the post where we were announcing that. Didn't the comments kind of point us in this direction?
Yeah,
anyway?
The comments pointed us, and then I think all of the different board game publishers making their own posts about it or just announcements made us, I think, just take into account the fact that this is a huge topic for board games, and this is a thing that we're going to have to, I think, acknowledge at least a little bit if we were to do the crowdfunding board game topic. And it just makes way more sense to do a much more focused topic about how are these announced tariffs, how are they going to affect the board game industry, what do they mean for like the just layman board gamer. I think it also is just, it's going to hit a lot of different facets, so it made more sense to do it as this is a dedicated episode talking about that. I'll go ahead and get out that I think that there are people who are much smarter than us that can talk about the more broad global issues of tariffs on the world and what this means. And Jack and I think both acknowledge that we play board games and talk about them online, and we both, I think, I know of myself, and I'm pretty sure of you, educate ourselves to the best of our abilities on everything, but we don't claim to be experts in tariffs, but I think we've done a lot of research on how this is going to affect the hobby that we love a lot, and this is our platform that we have to speak about it. So I think it makes sense for us to talk about it here.
And this is, of course, going to be biased, not only because of politics, even if we try to keep this apolitical, but we have other skin in the game. The Cardboard Herald is, of course, about covering board games, and while this isn't a real money-making endeavor or anything for either of us, it's an important hobby and creative outlet that we both poured a lot of time into. And we have developed strong, close relationships with a lot of other people in the hobby who are feeling significant impacts and worry about where this may lead, and it could either impact their livelihood, supplemental income, or just the general trepidation of something that they've poured their heart and soul into might not be a sustainable outlet anymore. So, all those disclaimers out of the way. What a week, Eric. What a week
What a
to
week.
be in. Yeah.
In DC has been very interesting. I don't know about Juno, but there have been ton of things going on in DC. To be
How
here.
are the protests looking? As a casual human just walking around DC, running around DC, driving around, do you see the signs of frustration and protest to a greater degree than maybe you would have seen a month ago or when you first moved down?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there was a protest on the National Mall near the Washington Monument that was like, I think 100,000 people is what it was claimed to be. I don't think that there have been any protests that have been close to that number from what I've seen around here. I will also say that I wasn't at that protest because I was working. But my wife did go and did, give me that update. So I think that they're everywhere. And also the run that I did today also had a lot of fun signs about it as the runs
I can imagine. Yep.
And I mean, even just going back to the run started at the Washington Monument. And so you had the, what was I going to say? All of the remnants of the signs that like had been put into the ground were still there. But yeah, so it's definitely having an impact on the ground here. I think we maybe should talk about, I guess, first of all, let's assume people have no understanding of what tariffs are and just try to give as you and I, as much of experts as we are, what they are. And they are essentially... go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's what I have listed here. Is I wanted to do just a divorce from board games.
Yeah.
What are tariffs? Which I'm happy to go into, unless you want to give your nutshell.
I think
perspective on this.
Go ahead and take the crack at it, Jack.
Okay, so tariffs are an economic or political strategy to hopefully enforce outcomes. And while there's a ton of discussion and deliberation, that's not how tariffs work, or tariffs are inherently a bad thing, or it's a tax on the working class, those are potential outcomes, but there are realities for why tariffs might exist and why every country effectively uses them in one way or another. So if a country is employing a tariff, ostensibly the goal here is that you are taxing on foreign produced goods that are coming into the country, such as the United States here. And with China, there is now a 54% tariff. So any goods that are produced in China will have additional taxes on them that are paid for by the company that is importing those goods. So it's not a direct tax on the consumer. Mm-hmm. How that translates is that now the company that used to not have to pay for this tariff is having to pay additional fines, and they're having to decide, how am I going to offset the cost of doing this? Because it's now more expensive. And so from the most basic economic level, they're either going to have to reduce their costs to offset that or increase their prices. Meanwhile, what the hope is for the populace that is now subject to these the companies that have traditionally used this infrastructure having to either cheapen their product or increase prices to maintain their same levels, because no company is going to want to just see the dip down. The thing has to get bigger or stay the same. Ideally, in a capitalistic society, companies want to have the numbers go up. So, ideally, American consumers or the country wherever tariffs are being employed would turn to products that now should be cheaper than the foreign produced products that are made locally. Now, in a reasonable structure, tariffs can be very good because then you can incentivize local production by either offsetting cost at the expense of the government, mitigating risk, and establishing that local infrastructure. The problem is that what this tariff seems to be bolstered out of is this sense that since World War II, when America really became one of the economic superpowers on the planet, that we have more and more gone into a global economy where production is handled in so many different places rather than local production. And it would be nice for us to have locally produced things. I think that is really great to have local production, employing American workers, creating jobs locally. However, that infrastructure doesn't exist. And for it to exist in a way that wouldn't drive up the cost dramatically because of the realities of the difference between labor in America and the cost of production in America, even if we had the infrastructure, is so much more expensive that most Americans wouldn't want to buy these alternatives locally produced. Now, that changes from industry to industry to industry. In a lot of ways, the cost comparison between some products might not be that different, or it might be cheaper to buy local made stuff as opposed to things imported from other countries. But when we're talking about something like board games, where the dominant production of board games, especially plastic and wood components, has traditionally all been done by China, then we just don't have the infrastructure in place to buy locally.
Yeah.
Publishers who may want to publish locally don't have that. For it to be established would be an endeavor of years. Never mind, again, the labor that it would cost to hire workers locally, and the amount of setup that would be necessary to get that into full operation, that a lot of companies might not be able to survive that amount of time, even if the government were, in a very socialist sense, trying to promote and incentivize companies, subsidizing them to get this infrastructure off the ground. We don't have a government that seems terribly interested in subsidizing small American businesses right now to develop that sort of infrastructure. And we don't seem to have a government right now that is looking to provide means of sustaining for any of the companies that are entirely dependent on foreign production right now. So that is why it is such a huge thing for not just the country in general to react to, but this board game industry. How'd I do? What do you think?
I think pretty
what
good.
Gaps do you need to fill, Eric?
I think pretty good. I think the things that I just would want to note on is, so the taxes paid on the cost of the good when it is first brought into America. So I think the big thing, at least for a lot of different industries, is that cost you pay for the good is not the cost that it ends up being. And so there ends up being a multiplying effect on how much that good is now going to cost more. So even if it is, in theory, just like a $5 markup, you then have to sell it at a certain percentage to get your profit margin, and that needs to be roughly the same amount. So you're hoping, I'm just going to say for the sake of simplicity, let's just say that they always need like a 20% profit margin. You now have to charge 20% more on that extra $5 it costs to bring it in, because you can't accept. It's difficult to take on that extra risk of financial burden and just hope that it makes its way down the line. Because now if any of the games get like damaged or dinged or dented on the way to the final like local game shop or any other industry, I think we're still in the
Right.
non-board game part of our tariff explanation. But you still have to try to keep that profit margin. So it's not as simple as just it's going to cost $5 more because it costs $5 more to tariff or to import because of the tariff. It gets multiplied a couple times over because things get charged a certain rate. I think to me that was the biggest thing that it makes it harder to explain, or it makes it harder to, I guess, brush under the rug that it's just like an extra $5 on this item. Why can't we just pay an extra $5 at the end of the day? But it's because I'm kind of getting a lot of this from Jamie Stagmeyer's post and others that I read past it, but I think he had the best job of explaining it, which is we have to charge that much more. Like when we sell a game, we charge it for an extra 30% markup, and now it's 30% with an extra $5 added in there. And then that gets charged an extra amount, and then it ends up being like an extra $25 for a game at the end of the day because of this one $5 tariff.
Yeah, and there are a lot of posts out there, and I think we're definitely going to link in the comments to a lot of those because they're fantastic resources. Stonemeyer Games, as you referenced, had a great one. Steve Jackson Games had a great one. I even got a press release emailed to me from Solus Games that was maybe one of the most, I guess, reactionary of these. Though I think everyone, even with a moderate head in the industry, is taking this with great severity. So I think it'd be good to kind of break up this discussion into like how this affects publishers, how it affects you as the consumer, hopefully dispelling some rumors along the way. And then again, like what are the things that at this point as consumers we can choose to do? While we did those disclaimers at the beginning, I do want to make it clear that, and this ties into one of the comments that we got on our post about this episode, this is going to be hard for Americans in general. And if you're an international listener, I think it's still worthwhile to listen to because I do think that there are going to be a lot of worldwide ramifications for you as a gamer. But for Americans right now, there's a lot of fear and speculation of a recession, and board games are a luxury. I think that, like art, it is an expression of creativity. It's something worth investing in. Play is important. But ultimately, owning and purchasing board games is a luxury, and there's going to be a lot of people who are more worried about how to get food to the table, how to keep their businesses alive, how to make sure that they have the essential items, the clothes for themselves and their families. Of course, those are all going to take priority. That said, we're a board game podcast, so we're going to talk about board games. So publishers. We mentioned Steve Jackson Games, Stonemeyer, and Solus. Have you seen any specific posts or talked to anyone in the industry at any other publishers with, formal, hey, this is our stance or this is our press release on this?
I've seen a few just on like Reddit board games that are people saying, I have a game that I have already charged people shipping for. Would you be okay if I, as a publisher, came back to you and said, due to recent tariffs, I would need to charge you this amount to get the game to you? Will you pay that? I've seen, I think, 2 that were in that vein. And it's kind of all over the place. So, Ares Games had a interview, or at least the director of production chatted with Board Game Wire, basically saying that the board game industry is going to be very tough to navigate.
Right.
And
Which is interesting because Ares is an Italian company.
Yeah.
So, but
it-
nonetheless,
it just
Americans
getting
are a
games.
huge part of the market.
We are a massive part of the market. I think Stonemeyer said 62% of their sales come in the U.S. or 65% of their sales are in the U.S.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that publishers, I think, from what I've seen, are most worried about is they're obviously worried about getting the games that they currently have in production out here into the table. Because they've already ordered it. Those are already in the works. It would be tough to say that it's a bigger... They just would probably have to run the math on it, but it is probably a bigger financial loss to stop production than to not just let those either eat into the margins or just charge more. But then the next game that they want to make is the one that seems to be the most at threat. So the ones that are currently in production are probably going to make it, but it's what do they do on the next game? Because now they're going to have to plan around these tariffs. And I think one thing that we didn't note on earlier, but just I think should be noted, because I think I'm going to talk about it later on in this podcast, is I've seen a lot of people who are got some sirens. They don't want to hear me speaking the truth, is what I'm hearing here.
Actually, I was laughing because our dogs went insane upstairs because one of my kids' friends came into the door. So the dogs are out, the sirens are going, things are going crazy. Speak truth to power.
But one thing that I just think we should mention is I've seen some commentary on these tariffs as being just a negotiatory tactic to hopefully secure ourselves better trade deals or fewer counter tariffs to these countries that we have placed tariffs on.
Right.
And that is totally possible. I think I've seen one country that has, I think it was Zimbabwe, I'm not positive. But it was a country announced that they would lower their tariff rate on the U.S. in exchange for us lowering the tariff rate that we set on them.
Right.
It's definitely a country that we don't do a ton of trade with that country, but that is like, I think for some people, the belief is that is what these tariffs are actually meant to be doing. They're meant to be a ploy to get us better tariff rates. And I think we have to kind of hope for that in a way, because the outcome that these are here to say is pretty scary for a lot of, I think, board gamers.
Right, and clearly our current administration is very reactive and unpredictable, and things could change at any moment. And I think that gets into like some of the potential pressure that could be put that will affect this. I mean, there are a lot of unifying voices out there. The one of the best journalists in the board game space, Eric Martin over on Board Game Geek, has a great consolidation of different publishers talking about the impact of tariffs, as well as a heartwarming or heartfelt story about learning a game with people from all over the world, a publisher from one country and a designer from another country, and learning with people who were translating into even further languages and unified by their desire to play games. So definitely worth reading. Another resource that we'll link to. But as far as the publishers, so, like, business is all about speculating based off of demand and availability of product and what you can deliver. And demand is greatly affected by how much consumers are going to be able to afford your product. If a board game is $200, there's many fewer gamers who are going to be putting down the cash to get that, as opposed to if your game is $60 or $80. And the unpredictability of what the next few months or next few years are going to be like in terms of these tariffs is really problematic. Creates a volatile market. You can't plan, and when you do plan, then you could potentially mess it up. So, the big two divisions when it comes to the publishers, as far as problems, are, like you said, the game that's made right now but hasn't been delivered, and the game that they're planning on for the future and what they're going to set that MSRP to.
Yeah.
If you as a gamer aren't familiar with like general distribution of manufactured products, board games follow a pretty similar model to books in that they're manufactured. Most of the effort involved in the game that isn't compensated for up front is the design work, or typically is the design work. Countless hours of making this game, refining it, and then you have to pay for all of the different assets associated with the game, the development of the game. There's the time invested on play testers, which play testers aren't typically paid for, but the administration of that play testing. But then you finally get to the production. You have a producer, typically in China, and when I say typically, I mean like 95% of the time in China, who have established relationships with all these different companies. Like Panda Manufacturing has, agents who can work with you as a first-time publisher, and you can be like, hey, this is kind of what I want my game to be like. And they can be like, well, what we did on Scythe was this, and what we did on Keystone is this. And they can talk about all the different games from different companies and how they brought that production out. And, like Panda and other manufacturers are going to help you navigate that. And this entire infrastructure has been streamlined and developed by gaming nerds who want to streamline and make more effective these companies, and done so in China. Now, for Kickstarter and crowdfunded backers, whether you're using GameFound or Kickstarter or whatever, part of the promise of that is that you gather up money, and that money is to say, this is going to pay for everything that was necessary to get it to production, and then we're going to produce some units that's going to go to you, the backers, as well as hopefully print enough that we can put some into retail. And that's where we're going to, as a company, continue to get money, because you already paid for it.
Yeah.
Like if I kickstart a game now, then I get that influx of money now, but my company continues, me as an employee of my own company, the employees that I have, the work that I have to put into the next game and the next game, that all needs continual revenue, and that's what that retail release hopefully is helping to fund. And that's a very tiny portion of the amount that you are putting into that Kickstarter, is that future production. And then what's happened is, say a year ago, this is true, I backed the project Deep Regrets by, it's like Kiddix Games or something. They're a new publisher. Deep Regrets is by TEDx Games. Looks like a really cool game. I try to, even though I get a lot of review copies, I still try to back some games. I like particularly backing small companies, seeing things come to light. And they just started bringing everything to the United States when there was the initial discussion of tariffs that were going to be put onto China in particular and a couple other countries. Then those tariffs went away, and then those tariffs came back. They offset the initial tariffs with the revenue that they already had. And they were in a fortunate position that they could do that, but that meant that their margins were significantly smaller. But they just narrowly got the games into the U.S. right before this 54% tariff was announced. Well, I guess an additional 34 on top of the 20% that was already there. Mm-hmm. And so what that means is just by happenstance, logistics, whatever, they narrowly dodged the bullet of spending an additional 34% of the invested value on the production of these units to every copy of this game that goes to them. And had they had to pay that additional 34%, totaling 54%, that could have made it so there is zero profit on all these products.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially when you're looking at that distribution model that I was talking about with this equating to books, where to get it into the retail brick and mortar stores' hands, because we want to support local companies, friendly local game stores, then these games need to be available at those stores at reasonable prices. That means that if it costs $10 to produce that game and get to the company, it's at the warehouse. Well, now you have to pay for the warehouse to hold the game and the employees at the warehouse to ship out the game. And then from the wholesaler, it needs to get to the retailer, and then the retailer has to have the shelf space for it, has to hold on to it, has to perceive it as a good value, and then ultimately they sell it to you, the consumer. And everyone along that way has to make some sort of profit. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense for them to participate in this supply chain to get it to the end user. So a company's margins on board games is pretty razor thin, and people largely are in this industry based out of sheer passion for the industry and trying to force it to be able to work in a way that gives them a livelihood. But if you were just in the business of making money, this is not the industry.
Not the industry.
No. Yeah, you don't have the easiest leverage to really take advantage of things. Of course, there are people that have made a lot of money in the hobby, but they probably could have made as much, if not more money, if they invested the same amount of passion and resources in many different industries.
Yeah.
So anyway,
and I think it's just like to make any like large amount of money, you need to sell a very large amount of games. Like to just become like a household name, you have to sell so many more copies than the average board game can ever hope to. I think with that, it's the margins are already so razor thin. So publishers, I feel like effectively have faced with these tariffs, have kind of three different avenues that they can look towards. One of which is not viable at all, which is to eat into their margins as much as possible to keep the game at a reasonable price for consumers. And that just, you cannot do that and continue making games. That's not a sustainable way to make a business or to continue the business that you've already established. Option two, which is just what is going to happen if your publisher is you're going to have to pass off at least some of, if not all of, the extra costs to the consumer. And as we talked about before, it's the people who make the game in China. They make the game and they sell it, and it gets imported by the board game publisher. They sell the game to a distributor at a much lower rate than what you or I could buy it for. But it still is marked up by a certain percentage. And the fact that it's a percentage is kind of what makes this go out of sorts.
Right.
But it has to be because they have to reach a certain profit margin based on how much money they're putting in. So they sell it to a distributor. That distributor, at that point, might sell it to a local gaming shop, or they might sell it to a different distributor who then sells it to a local gaming shop. And every stop along the way, it gets marked up by another percentage of what's already there, and then more percentage. And that's just what is going to have to happen to keep board game publishers in business. And because of that, board game consumers are just going to see, I think, pretty significant price hikes. And then the third option, which is the one that is the most, I think it sounds very good in theory, but is so unachievable, is look to manufacturing your games in the US. And the kind of just flip side of that is the United States imports most raw material, so we would still be paying a markup. Like, we're already paying a markup on the tariffs to just get the raw material into the United States. We might pay less because we might be able to get it from a different source than China, so you might not be paying that 54%. You might be paying a lower percent from a different country that you can buy the raw material from. But one would have to have a factory already in place, which there aren't really factories that produce board games at the same quality that China does. But let's say in theory there was. You're going to be paying the United States labor rates, which you can make the argument that we probably should be paying the U.S. labor rates, and that it is, if that's how much that labor costs, that should be how much it costs everywhere. And that is, I think, a stance you can take. And I think you can also take the stance that if we're doing that, we're at least keeping the money within the United States, which I think that is one of the reasons, in theory, why these tariffs would be put into place, is that we're trying to keep the money in the United States as opposed to continuing to push money abroad. And so we have the raw goods. We have a factory that is done by U.S. labor, and that then is going to make a board game that is going to be more expensive and is going to end up being just as expensive if you just don't invest in manufacturing here.
And that's all even hypothetical. Like, again, I don't want to... I can't underscore enough how much the problem of finding affordable labor to do these jobs at the scale that would need to be done would be. Like, unemployment, of all the bad things that are going on in the United States right now, one of the few good things about the economy is unemployment is pretty low right now. So that means there's not a lot of people who are in demand for positions, and wages are actually pretty decent. They should be higher. Living wages should be available, but that's largely because the cost of living is so dramatic that wages have to get up there. And so that's, like a whole other economic tangent that we could get down. But the point being is, like, right now, in my day job, I have to hire for positions for staff, and even good paying jobs, the applicant pools are getting really, really, really small because there's not as many people who are really looking for work. Definitely, there are some, and there are a lot of reasons that could go into this, but I'm continually confronted by the fact that our McDonald's here in Juneau advertises that their starting pay is $18 an hour. And if McDonald's is paying $18 an hour, then I would think that a warehouse employee would want to be paid as much, if not more. And board games aren't the only thing being impacted by these tariffs. And there's going to be a scramble if there is this grand shift in infrastructure. It would be a massive undertaking and a scramble to build the infrastructure for so many industries that would take precedence over board gaming. Because this is such a niche, small thing that I don't think that we would be able to find the labor, the warehouses, as you said, the imported goods. There would just be like a vacuum if all of the companies that are affected by this and all the industries were then trying to establish what they need to within the country.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that just should be said is my hypothetical earlier was assuming that we did have factories that could do it, which we don't. The numbers that I've seen, and I don't work in construction, so these numbers could be off, but these are numbers that I've seen a couple different places, so I'm leaning towards believing they're true. If you were a publisher who didn't, or like was interested in establishing a board gaming manufacturing plant in the United States or a factory in the United States, from today, it will be 2 years until just the foundation of the factory is laid. That is not counting any of the getting the rest of the factory built, getting everything put into place. And even if that number is just 1 year, because I think that also includes like figuring out where you're going to build the factory, buying the land, negotiating that contract, negotiating the contract with the construction company of this is the space we want, this is what we're looking for. Then you also have to design what the factory is going to look like, because you can't build the foundation until you know what the factory is going to look like. Like, it just is such a long time until that would be able to become a reality. Right. That it is, we're going to have to do the other way at minimum for, I would presume the rest of Trump's term. Right. Like, in theory, if board game publishers were trying to build a factory and bring manufacturing here, it is going to take us 4 years to do that.
Right. And who knows if this even needs to exist, which then may become like a huge sunken cost.
Yes.
And there's also the fear of if there's like a massive recession, property prices and everything are really high right now, and it would suck to invest in property that is going to be half as valuable in 2 years or something. Yeah. That's the problem that a lot of people are looking at with house prices and everything. But
and go ahead.
I was going to say that so the point that we're making is that publishers are having to figure out how they're going to plan for the future and how to figure out the immediate ramifications. We're already seeing that there are a lot of publishers. Our buddy John, who has been on the podcast before and been on the channel in different ways, he was just sending us some screenshots of Comet, the Blood in the Sand expansion, announced that Matago was going to need to charge consumers for an additional fee to offset the tariffs, which, that's going to be a regularity, and that isn't the only Kickstarter that's doing that right now.
Yeah.
And Matago is a ongoing, well-established company with lots of projects and employees and that kind of stuff, so you'd think that they'd be able to sustain a lot of trepidatious waters. They're not just the upstart mom and pop company. They are very well respected and have achieved a lot of things in this industry, and they are trying to figure out how to do this. Granted, they're saying that they're absorbing a lot of the costs, but some of these costs are going to move on.
Yeah.
I think we'll see more of that. There might be one good option I've seen discussed by publishers is to charge tariff-specific pricing. We'll keep our existing pricing model. However, when you are getting charged for shipping for crowdfunding your games, then if there's a tariff in place, then we'll just have tariff as, a potential price that you pay.
Yeah.
We'll also see a lot of ramifications on if there are single run games or continual production of evergreen games. Like when we're thinking about the future, more and more companies, I think, are going to be hesitant about just having an ongoing churn of games. And instead, you could just have the hopeful guarantee of getting all the money up front, having well-documented contingencies to have people pay for those. And then if you want to do another print run, then that additional print run is going to come with additional crowdfunding. And if there isn't the demand for enough to really sustain that entire extra print run, then that game is just one and done until demand comes up again. I think we're also going to see a price increase in board games in general. We've talked about that. But what I think this means globally, and this gets into one of the comments that we got on our posts. There was one poster who was talking about how they're in Indonesia and that they like getting games through Kickstarter. They have worries about this. That's from Hans Lamal. There's probably some.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Hans
5632.
Lamal. I would assume. I don't know them.
Just questioning about maybe digital adaptations will have more and more success. Why paying hundreds of dollars for a physical game when a digital version costs only $10? And I think that's smart. I think video games in general are going to be one of those things where people are going to turn to as far as entertainment mediums. And
none of Nintendo has anything to say about it. They're raising prices. They're shutting it down.
Hey, Chrono Trigger costed $80 when it came out in like 1995. So if Mario Kart World is going to cost $80, I don't think it's.
I think that's actually. We can have a Nintendo chat. We can on our Nintendo cast that we have with just the two of us that we don't publish because Nintendo would shut us down. We can chat about that.
Exactly. But I thought it was really interesting that this comment was responded to by someone else saying, but you're not in the U.S. And I'm not going to call out who said that because I'm actually now going to say, like, that is born out of maybe not malicious ignorance, but I think ignorance to the impacts of the situation. If the company that is publishing these board games, whether you're in Indonesia or you're in UK or you're in France or you're in Zimbabwe or wherever, if you like the games that are being made right now, most of those have to depend on the American market to be able to exist as a company.
Yeah.
And if it becomes untenable to continue to produce for the American market, especially a lot of the American publishers, then we're just going to see fewer games. And there are long-standing companies that are still little indie companies that make really cool, interesting stuff, that have creative individuals who strive to bring fresh, new ideas, fun things to the market, that are considering just calling it quits. I have friends in this industry who are publishers that Eric and I have talked to together, or I reached out to just the other day, and they're like, I don't even know, like, how we continue as a company. Some people are just going to invest more of their money and hope for the best. Some people are like, I've canceled my plans for additional Kickstarters, and thank God I have a spouse who has some level of income, because I don't think my company can even continue to exist in these current conditions. That's a dramatic outcome, and that's certainly not everyone. But I expect that if these tariffs continue, that's what we're going to see more of. And so it will have a global impact. All of these companies that depend on the American market, maybe exist as companies within the American market, are going to suffer. And whether you're in, again, Indonesia, UK, anywhere else, the games that you love are going to be impacted by this.
Yeah.
So it's tumultuous. It's a tough time.
It is very tumultuous, and I think a couple things just of note on that. One, the commenter Hans Lamal did mention like an American company where they import the goods, package them in the U.S., and then ship them worldwide. So that those prices of the raw goods being imported are going to affect how that game gets distributed globally. Right. Another thing that they mentioned, I've seen from publishers as well, is maybe letting off kickstarting where these games are going to be very expensive, and therefore they're already really expensive. It's going to be much harder to get people to pay more for them, like 20%, like an additional, if you buy a game that's $150, an additional 20% is just $30 that you would have to pay to cover the cost of that, which as a consumer is just going to be a lot. One thing that I've seen occasionally around is that I think would shake up the board game industry more than just would shake up the board game industry is the fact that publishers are going to be looking into direct distribution so that they no longer have to go through the distributors and the retailers and start trying to figure out ways to sell their games direct to consumers. One, so that it just, the extra tariff cost doesn't get multiplied more and there's just fewer moving parts. And I think the really sad thing about that is I think that it is likely going to be an avenue that a lot of companies are going to take more frequently take, is start becoming their own distributors. And your friendly local gaming store is going to not have access to games anymore. And it's going to hit them, I think, harder than most.
Yeah, and they're going to be hit hard in general because the amount of free money that people have, or not free money, but available money to spend on disposable. There's a word to spend on luxury goods is already going to be limited. And then if the availability of these products is going to be reduced, or they're going to be available at much lower prices, say the wholesale price versus the retail price when it's held directly from the publisher, then that's just going to incentivize people to buy from the publisher, which we want the publishers to survive. But I also want Riddle Valley Games and Alaska Robotics and Hearthside Books here in Juneau to survive. I want these companies to be able to provide these things because the retail space is good. The local economy to have those jobs in my community is good. And they are also environments where I can go in and learn about games, talk to someone about them, play those games with these people. They can help promote things like our conventions. Platypus Con has retail presence from these brick and mortar stores. Not only because they're good outlets for those stores as well, but because these are companies where there's synergistic overlap and mutual investment in this hobby. It's an important part of a thriving hobby and economy to have these smaller stores. And it would be tragic to see them all go away or be negatively impacted. And so I guess that gets into like, what are things that, even if they're small, what are things that we can do? I don't know, like in the face of this, or in the face of economic instability that has been going on for, say, since the pandemic, are there things that you've thought about purposely doing or changing or doing your part for the economy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what I would say, and this goes as much as possible with the caveat that you should do this as you are able to.
Right.
Buy merch from publishers or from your friendly local gaming shop. Merch is one of the most high margin items that you can. You're supporting them and you're getting a thing that's probably cheaper than a board game. And that's maybe a thing that you can do that's a bit easier to accomplish.
How about as a free thing, you could write
call
your representatives.
Call your representative if you feel so inclined, and let them know how you feel about it and how it's going to affect the things that you love.
Right.
And if you don't really have a representative and instead have a shadow senator, like I do, which was very fun when I first found out that that's what we call our senator. We could just call him like, or we could call them like, I don't know, just district senator, to note that he's not an actual senator and doesn't get an actual vote. But no, we call our senator a shadow senator, which is rad. Or call your shadow senator.
Yeah. You could also there are things like listen, public resources are tough right now. Libraries are in a tough position right now. Schools are in a tough position right now. But again, like, even if you don't have the disposable income, libraries are a purchaser of media, and they're like a repository and a consumer, or maybe not a consumer, but they're an archive of media. And traditionally we think of that as books, but they also have audiobooks and often movies and games. And so talking to your local library about if they can invest in making games available, they purchase those games. That's an additional way of supporting companies and making more availability of games in your community. That's not necessarily helping the brick and mortar store, but there is a degree of hopeful rising tide lifts all boats situation.
And if you know,
I think
I would just say, if you know construction, like, just find a plot of land, start laying down a foundation. It's going to take a while anyway, so you might as well get that process started.
Right.
Of your own volition.
Certain behaviors, like, I made a post about this on Blue Sky, but, like, I think publishers right now, the key that they're going to need to adhere to is transparency. Everyone's reeling from the economic effects of this. And I think the more that you can be transparent about how you are budgeting, how you are anticipating and reacting to changes in the market, changes in the global infrastructure, the more goodwill that you're going to get, and tolerance from people who are like, if you lay it out for me like that, sure, I'll kick in a couple extra bucks so that way I get my game. So I think transparency is going to be huge. I think at the same time, consumers, we're going to need to demand that transparency, but also reward transparency, good business practices, and also reward good games. Like, we as a community need to start thinking about, like, what are the games that we want to see in the world and putting our money to that. That's a massively subjective thing. Ideally, that's what's already happening. You vote with your dollar. If you want a billion miniatures in your game, great. If you want a game that's all wood components, great. But start thinking conscientiously about your money as not just what the end product that you're going to receive is, but also a vote. Because inevitably, with the economic turmoils, even if these tariffs are overturned, I anticipate that the next 5 years are going to be transformative for this hobby. And so if you're now going to go down from buying 10 games or kickstarting 10 games this year into maybe only doing 5 because of your own economic pressures, then think about what is it about these games, not just as end products, but as the company that promotes them, that you want to see. Think about who are the creative individuals involved and what are the practices from the companies that you want to support. For some people, that may just be they make the type of game that I want to play. For other people, that may be, they don't use AI art or, or generative illustrations. Or they're paying their employees a living wage. Whatever it is, think about the things that you're purchasing, particularly with your disposable income and luxury goods, and be principled. That is the company that you are helping stay afloat. And if you can only help so many companies stay afloat, then be intentional about how you're
gonna have to use your wallet as a way of communicating which companies you are able to support.
Right.
Yeah. Or I had another one. I got lost. The other thing, just educate yourself. Make sure that you're reading up, knowing what's on the horizon, and kind of giving grace to publishers as new things arise. I think this was a really eye-opening week of educating myself on tariffs. Like I had a really pretty good idea of how tariffs just function in general, but I think this week really helped me understand how this is going to affect the board game industry as a whole. And I think that there are a lot of resources. We're going to put some down in the description. But yeah, Eric Martin's and then Jamie Stegmeier's posts are the two that I found the most, like, just very eye-opening of where we stand. And I think it just is more helpful the more people understand what this means for our hobby.
Yeah, and look, there are a lot of people within this hobby that voted for this administration, and I'm trying to keep this apolitical. Inherently, I disagree with this administration on many things, but the idea of tariffs was not something this administration shied away from as part of the plan.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone anticipated it being this big, but tariffs was one of the silver bullet proposals of this administration. And what I would say is, as you vote in the future, whether you're voting for one party or the other, just try and do the extra research of what is one of the hot button topics. Don't just trust what conventional wisdom is that a friend told you or you read on Reddit, or is just a politician that you really like is against this thing, so therefore you'll align yourself to be against it. Learn about what are some of the talking points here and how that may impact you and the people that you love, and try to do informed voting. There's certainly been situations where politicians that I have voted for did things where later on I was like, oh, I didn't realize that that's what they were talking about. But now in retrospect, I have egg on my face. And since then, through hopefully wisdom and maturity, I have tried to take it upon myself to learn more in as apolitical of a situation as I can to about the hot button topics. Of course, there are always going to be failed campaign promises, betrayals of the public's trust. And so there are probably a lot of people who voted for this administration that are currently feeling very betrayed that this isn't the model that they were promised. There are probably some people who feel maybe this is exactly what they were wanting. But the last thing that I can say is that this is clearly a result of massive executive power, that this could happen in an instant and cause this much volatility, this much reactivity. And we as Americans and global citizens just need to make sure that we're informed. We realize what sorts of distributions of rights there are, checks and balances, and that through maneuvering democratic processes, there are ways to change these things and affect these things. But it relies on measured understanding and trying to move toward the center on so many sides rather than radicalization to the point where you are leaning into ignorance or unwillingness to understand fundamental principles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was that kind of apolitical, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the bottom line is it's up to...
Don't suck.
It's up to voters to educate yourself and just make sure that you're voting with your own best interests. You can vote for whatever political party you would like to. I think that that's not necessarily kind of the issue at hand, but just making sure that you are aligning your votes with what you want. And the two-party system in America makes that very difficult.
That's true. We've talked a lot about this, and it was a pretty focused topic. It's a pretty heavy topic. And like Eric and I both said earlier, we're not the experts on this. Continue to educate yourself. Hopefully we'll have some more lighthearted topics in the future. But if you do like this kind of more intensive structure, then definitely let us know. As far as me handling the hosting duties this week, I want to be transparent that it has nothing to do with Eric's inability to handle this or unwillingness. I think it was more, Eric is an important and at this point essential member of the Cardboard Herald. However, this is a tricky thing. We might put our feet in our mouths. There might be some challenging stuff to talk about. And I wanted to make it clear that the bottom line on decisions from the Cardboard Herald, the buck stops when it comes to me. Yes. And I thought that would be good when we're kind of talking about more of a sensitive topic like this. But we'll probably return, even for sensitive stuff, to have Eric host in the future. Eric did have the great idea of maybe we could reach out to some publishers to talk specifically about this type of thing as the dust settles a little bit more.
Yeah.
And we have more cohesive thoughts.
Give it a little breathing room to see one if these are actually going to stick, and also just make sure that we have had time to more thoroughly prepare ourselves past just 1 week of announcement.
Right. And if anyone has any sort of topics that they'd like to hear about, either related to this, or if you have a topic that is completely unrelated and you're like, "Whew, this would be a palate cleanser. Let's do this."
What's your favorite color to play as in board games?
You can put that in the comments, or you can always hit us up at cardboardherald@gmail.com. And that is, I think that's going to do it for the tension, Eric. What do you think?
I think that's good. I think we did a good job with the tension, and now we can just zonk.
Chill. Yeah. We could talk about Nintendo. We could
our Nintendo
cast. Our Nintendo podcast. Hey man, Donkey Kong Bonanza is maybe the best name they could have given to a new Donkey Kong game.
It seems like that one's been coming for years. Bonanza feels like, I'm really surprised. Like I clearly there hasn't been one already named Bonanza, but it really feels like Bonanza is in the works. I'm really confused why we got both Mario Kart World and then Kirby Air Riders in the same direct as like the big announcements. Just feels it's two racing games.
Yeah, well, I could care less about Kirby, so that gives me Mario Kart. Okay. Hey, listen, Kirby is fine as a Smash Brothers character.
That's the most controversial thing you've said this entire podcast. That's okay. The most controversial thing.
Palette cleanser, we could just do a tier list of Smash Bros. Ultimate characters and generate endless amounts of hate. Why is S tier exclusively Lucario? Okay, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, audience, for listening. Thanks for supporting. Thank you, Eric, for being Ride or Die. I've been Jack, and he has been Eric, and you have been a wonderful audience.
See ya.
Bye.